Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Institute for Government. My name's Peter Riddle. I'm the director here. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Sir Ian Cheshire to the IFG for his first public speech in the role he took up in the spring. Understandably, he wasn't able to speak immediately, so one or two little distractions going on during the spring. But now he's doing this speech on the day of the publication of the annual report of the government's lead non-executive for the current financial year. It's on the website, on the Cabinet Office website. I strongly recommend it. There's a lot of very interesting information in there.
Read.
Now, Sir Ian has had a very successful career in business, notably as Chief Executive of Kingfisher over many years, and before that in other aspects of retailing. He served as the lead non-executive for the Department of Work and Pensions until early this year, when he became the government's lead non-executive director, and he's now also part of the Cabinet Office board in that respect. Now, when we met a few weeks ago, Ian said to me that what he wanted to look at was not only the position of non-executive directors, which had developed since the revamping 5 years ago under his predecessor, Lord Browne, but also particularly the challenges for the new Parliament. And I think that will be one of the most interesting things looking ahead, because now we've got a majority government, we've got a fixed-term Parliament, and a very active programme, obviously particularly connected with the spending review, which is now underway. So there are a lot of challenges for the role of non-executive directors. And one of the things we found at the Institute for Government, particularly in our work with politicians of various kinds, is how even now they're not fully aware of what exactly non-executive directors do. That we found when we were talking, for example, to opposition politicians as part of our political leadership work for the election, they had a vague idea, but many of the particular teams didn't know. And it's even true to some extent also of some select committees, because not only does the select committee have a relationship with the permanent secretary, but increasingly the relationship with the lead non-exec for the department is a very important relationship. But in a wider sense, our feeling still is that this is not sufficiently understood, which is why I'm delighted to welcome Ian Cheshire here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you all for coming, although I'm reliably informed at least half of you are here for the lunch rather than for me, but I hope that went down okay. I'm going to do a sort of short, I hope sort of not too ranty a speech, really coinciding with the fact we've published the report today. But I'm very keen then that we have this as a more of interactive conversation, and it is an opportunity for a dialogue. As Peter said, I'm fairly new in post. Officially started in April, but nothing much happened till after May the 7th for funny reasons. And it feels like we're now right at the beginning of what I really think is the second phase of the non-executive experiment, which I think it started out at, but is now the non-executive contribution to the process of government. And I'm personally very pleased to be involved. I stepped down from DWP after 4 years in October, really thinking that I had learnt a lot. I went from, I suppose, an average sort of background in commerce to not, and certainly not knowing anything about how the machinery of government worked, to learning a lot more about how things actually get delivered and how things could be perhaps sort of move forward. And the reason I ended up, sort of taking on the role was I felt that I was just at the point when I might actually know something vaguely useful, and it might make more sense to apply that. And I think that's true for quite a lot of the non-execs, is that it has been quite a learning curve. And for those of you in the civil service, I wouldn't underestimate just quite how different this world is. While there are lots of transportable skills, there is absolutely no way you can just wander in from the commercial world, call everyone in the civil service a muppet, and just tell them what to do. This is very, very different. But the right balance, I think, is something that is a sort of fruitful combination. So I'm seeing this at the start of what is a 3-year appointment, and I think it's sort of what I want to do today was sort of just really touch on 3 things, which is a slight sort of stock take of where are we now, 4 years on from when this was started as an idea, as a way of intervening in the machinery of government. Secondly, what are my personal priorities, i.e. what's my job spec and what do I think I do to help in this process. And then out of that, one of the things that we've identified are 5 cross-cutting themes for the non-execs as a network to focus on across government. And it's important to sort of bring that distinction out because having been a departmental NED, you do inevitably focus down into one of the 27 available silos that are here. Now, one of the challenges I think is to find again a balance there, which is yes, that the NED's contribution is primarily and absolutely a departmental contribution, and that's important. However, I think there is also a need to be part of the overview of government and the overview of some of the key challenges, particularly given what's coming down the track in terms of spending reviews, what's coming down in terms of prioritisation, and some of the challenges that the civil service will be facing in the next 3 to 5 years. So I think there is a need for this, if you like, overview role plugged into very much the agenda that Jeremy Hayward and John Manzoni are driving to inform the themes across government, and we'll come back to explain what those 5 are and why we've picked them. But if we do the sort of quick stock take first, and it is worth sort of stepping back, and this was an idea that really owes its genesis to Francis, now Lord Maud, who I think wanted to take a partially existing model. So there were non-execs in government. There are still lots of non-execs, particularly on arm's length bodies. I think Jerry Grimston was telling me he's got 70 non-execs of his own, which made me feel a bit inadequate because I've only got 70 to look after, and that's just one department. So there are, if you like, histories of people being involved. I was particularly distressed to open the Sunday Times this weekend and see the papers of Ted Heath experimenting in 1970 with the bold idea of bringing business people into Whitehall. And I thought, okay, 45 years on, we're back doing this again. But I think what was different about 2010-11 was an attempt to take a number of important steps at one point and establish the departmental boards as a governance vehicle to support the delivery of ministerial objectives. It's very clear it was doing that, but to do it in a way that provided more expertise, more advice and more challenge perhaps than purely the civil service talking to the ministers on their own could provide. And there were a number of steps which I think Francis took which were really significant. The Secretary of State's chairing the boards, and again, frankly, some people do that more thoroughly and better than others, but everyone sort of took on that responsibility. And that means the key political player is in the room, and it does change the quality of the conversation by not that being, if you like, purely a perm-sec-led process. Secondly, that we have had this structure of a government lead non-exec trying to sort of look at the totality of the picture rather than it being 27 different agendas. A lead non-exec for each department, and again from personal experience I've found that both a challenge and a fascinating role, but it did mean that there was one person on the board who was thinking very hard about how to make the board work best, who also could be entrusted with the recruitment of other non-execs and was the obvious lead person to then go with effectively a triangular relationship between the Secretary of State, the Perm-Sec and the lead non-exec. And that produced, I think, a very different dynamic and a different opportunity for those conversations to happen, which otherwise might be a bit sort of discussion percussion perhaps rather than maybe listening. And then the enhanced role of the non-execs, and that led into particularly areas like audit and other areas where there was a recognition that we were looking for quite big heavyweights coming in. So this was an attempt to sort of raise the bar and raise the sort of level of involvement. And there was, I think, a very conscious decision to go out and look for some quite big names. I hasten to add much bigger than mine, and we've had a great set of contributors in the first 5 years, most of whom actually are carrying on into this next phase, although there's obviously a natural bit of turnover and churn. So we've had the boards working. There have been 70 board meetings in the last year. You can see the stats in the report. Some people are using this as a quarterly board meeting. Some are doing 10 times, which even actually, frankly, by PLC standards is a lot. But actually what we're seeing is the boards being adapted to the needs of the different department. And I think that's one of the key takeaways from the early conclusion is the requirements of different departments are really quite different, and therefore the mix of skills you need on the board in terms of the non-execs, the type of issues you cover and the way you cover it are substantially different. Certainly if you compared, say, DCMS with DWP, there are major sort of delivery and engagement challenges in DWP, which frankly DCMS doesn't have. It has a lot more issues around how you manage arm's length bodies and the type of skill sets you need to do that. So I think it's just worth sort of, as Peter referred to, the sort of level of knowledge about what does a board do and what is it. It's worth just spending two sort of seconds on that. Firstly, because for those of us coming from the commercial world and used to PLC boards, it's very important to say that departmental boards are not PLC corporate boards. As a number have said, it's a sort of strange animal. It's not like other stuff that we've sat on, been involved with. It is an advisory board. It's absolutely clear that the ministers are the elected representatives of the people. They set the priorities. It's also clear that there are very long established and complex processes for governance around accounting officers and accountability back to Parliament. So this is in some ways not your standard PLC audit committee non-exec balances exec. This is a tripartite structure, and the role of the non-execs within it is advice and challenge, and it must be independent challenge, and it must be really speaking, in the old phrase, truth to power. Because I think one of the dangers of the sort of bilateral conversation is it can turn, if it's not carefully managed, it can turn into a sort of good news event where nothing is ever really surfaced. And I think one of the roles that the non-execs can do is really help bring that into the picture. So the board meeting is made up of three groups. It's non-execs, the ministers, and the exec team from the department. And that three-part structure I think generally makes for a very different conversation, and we are there to look at strategic planning and development and major project delivery and major, if you like, departmental initiatives. There is a great danger in those boards disappearing into the detail of, have we done 3 and 6 here, or have I done that there? And one of the challenges is to make sure, we really stand back and say, look, what's important? What's the department really trying to do, and what are the critical bits of information we need to have as a board to have that debate? And I think the thing that I would say out of the first phase of the development is that each department began to work out what it needed to really focus on and how it should go about it. So the challenge in transport is quite different from DWP. The challenge in say, the Cabinet Office, which I attended yesterday, is very different. There is a need to find the right rhythm and the right, particularly management information and reporting. And I think for us, coming from the outside, one of the shocks was the lack of management information that was actionable. There was colossal amount of data, unbelievable reams of data, but actually trying to say, what does good look like? What are the top 5 things we need to do? Therefore, what are the things you would track and measure on a regular basis? And by the way, even if you're meeting quarterly, the board pack has to come out monthly. That was, I think, a development phase. So I think we've been through a development phase. And I think the other thing that we've seen is a diverse bunch of non-execs getting involved in quite a lot of different ways. So just to mention, for those of you who haven't met, until the end of January, I was running Kingfisher, the owner of B&Q. So it's a big multinational, £11 billion sales, 80,000 people. We've got other people, Barbara Stocking, the Chief Executive of Oxfam, until very recently did a 4-year stitch. We've got Jerry Grimston at MOD, who's the chair of Standard Life. We've got a very wide variety of people, and it's an area I'm also quite keen, I think, to extend maybe on the perception that the first wave were all basically FTSE chairmen and chief executives. I think we need a mix, including a lot of mix from probably the third sector, and particularly skill sets. So we're definitely looking for more people in digital and HR as the challenges for the civil service emerge. I think the point I would make most strongly about the value of the boards is that they are not there to have a board meeting. Although that's an important part of the process, and it is a very large amount of the control arrangements that it's going to come up at a board, that's the way you control it. Actually, most of the value add, I think, happens outside the board meeting. And that's got a couple of dimensions to it. First, it means that you need skills, particularly from the non-execs, who can contribute into particular areas. So if I take my experience at DWP, we consciously had one person, in the shape of David Lister, the Chief Technology Officer of National Grid, who was used to dealing with colossal legacy computer systems and change and digital, and he spent most of his time actually outside the board meeting trying to work through the very complex challenges that the legacy systems and the challenge of UC created. So David was really man-marking that subject. I was spending a lot of time on talent and engagement. That's my personal area. Clara Furs, who's taken over from me, was working on finance and risk. And Willie Rowe was there because of the arm's length bodies we do have and his experience in it. I think with the benefit of hindsight now, I would say the ideal board is probably 5 rather than 4 non-execs to give you the breadth of functional talent. So I think there are common themes in a lot of departments, particularly big delivery departments, where you want someone with big people skills, big operational skills. Practically everyone is doing digital transformation, so people who understand that sector. And then in other areas, you need some quite specialist skills. So if you're talking about treasury, it's a slightly different set of requirements than you'd have, say, over in, say, MOJ. So from my point of view, what we're seeing the non-execs do is, yes, they're contributing and they're helping hold to account the delivery through the board meetings, but actually more interestingly, I think they're trying to work out how to help the departments get better at delivering and better essentially at the capacity of those organisations to do more. And so as a result, you see non-execs get drawn into a wide variety of reviews. Joe Grimston's reviewed the Civil Service Commission. Sam Laidlaw did a specific deep dive on the West Line Transport contract. I personally did quite a long piece on the governance of change and programme management in DWP, and others have been involved in that. We're also finding that as the system gets used to what the non-execs can and can't do, we're being asked to get involved in different areas. I think one of the more interesting bits that I've seen recently is the lead non-execs having a very major input into the performance review of the permanent secretaries. And I had a slightly out-of-body experience in the last week of reviewing Jeremy Hayward, which was very interesting. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to publish that, apparently. So, but I think the other area that we've seen is out of the audit chairs, an increasing, growing involvement in the risk management, which is a big theme we'll come back to. The risk management processes in government departments, which have come from, I think, in some cases, a fairly sort of undeveloped state and still have more to do. But that sort of specialist capability is very, very important. And then the last 2 areas which I've seen a lot of people get involved with is increasingly advice on appointments. So a lot of non-execs have been involved in interview panels, helping find people, select people. And it's obviously when you have a certain technical expertise, but I think as a general independent voice to say, look, is that the person we want? That's been pretty important. And the final area has been always around individual projects. And one of the advantages I think the non-execs bring once they know their department, which is quite an important caveat, because I think it does take you a while to work out which way is up. I think you can get involved in particular departmental issues as projects and then deep dive on them and actually contribute because you are understanding enough of the problem, but you're not, if you like, inside it. So that perspective of, we had a particular issue in DWP about how we were going to try and cope with the move to shared services, which on one level is an obvious thing to want to do in government. On the other level, if you're running DWP and you're trying to save 4 billion, being asked to save 8 million on shared services feels like a bit of a distraction. But actually, we still need to get that done. And so working out how to get the organisation to do that and giving it to someone, in the case of myself, who's done quite a lot of shared services stuff in the past, is just a way that potentially the department can engage with something in a way that doesn't necessarily sort of fit their, if you like, the day job. So I think the sort of challenge for the sort of progress to date is, I think this has become now seen by the perm secs in particular as a useful institution. I think for 3 main reasons. One is the quality of the non-execs has been generally impressive, and I think the perm secs have appreciated the quality of input. And I think that is very important to maintain that in the future. If it had been a not particularly impressive bunch or not particularly motivated, I think it wouldn't have worked. It has worked because the quality has been there. Secondly, I think the politicians and ministers have discovered that this can actually be a useful mechanism, particularly for reaching into departments in a slightly sort of maybe less directly confrontational way, and having someone else to sense check some of their impressions, because when you're sitting there trying to evaluate something, if it's just you and all you're getting is the information from your team, actually having someone you can bounce something off is incredibly helpful. And that, to some extent, is what you do in the corporate world as a non-exec. It is very much an advisory sort of sense check function, but it's harder I think, for the Secretaries of State to do that. And the third thing is, I think there's been an understanding that we are a slightly unusual breed in terms of the role. So I think there was some confusion, and there may yet to be in the future, that essentially these are special advisors in disguise, or very, very, very cheap ministers, because don't get paid, and I think a third of us don't take any money for it. So I think what is important to say is there's an independence and engagement, which is a fine balance, and it's not the strict definition of independence as in the independent non-exec in the PLC world, because we are there to make sure we are delivering the priorities that are not set by us. But there has to be the ability to speak that truth to power. There has to be a willingness to say, look, if you're not interested in listening to me, I can always go and do other things. And the willingness from the, if you like, the ministerial side and the Perm Sec side to say, okay, this is advice that is motivated by a common desire to win rather than another agenda. So despite standing here today in this role, I'm not trying to get promoted up the civil service, nor am I trying to have a political career. I'm just generally interested in trying to contribute to getting stuff done better. If we can do that, I think we have played already a useful role, and I think we can play an even better role going forward. So looking forward, what's my job spec? What am I focused on? I've got basically 3 priorities. Firstly is in reference to what Peter said, which is my job as lead is to spread the word as far as I can through events like this and elsewhere about the value of the board and the way a board can be used best to create value add. As Peter said, look, there are new ministers who've never had to see a board before. They don't know what it is. They don't know why they've got it. There are also, in the 27 boards we've had over the last few years, as people have changed, we've seen different levels of engagement from Secretaries of State, and that's reality. So one of my jobs is to try and make sure that everyone, both on the PermSec and the political side, understands that this is a very useful resource if you use it well. And if you target it at the areas where the department needs to make a difference, it can be extremely helpful for everyone, and it is a good thing. But a part of this is absolutely the point Peter made earlier, which is you don't know what you don't know. So somebody's got to go out and beat the drum on why this is a good idea. And I don't want to oversell this, because this is the sort of danger of saying, oh, this is absolute panacea for all forms of sort of departmental delivery. It's not. It is a cog in the vast machine that is government. But I think it's quite a potentially interesting cog, particularly at this moment. And I'll come back to that right now, because as business plans are made by departments and spending plans are going to be reviewed, the ability of the board to contribute to that and provide balance and perspective in it, I think, is a sort of unique role, and it's very hard to find that anywhere else in the system. So I think that is, right now the most critical bit and the most important time potentially for the non-execs since they were started. So if my first job is, tell people about boards, why it's a good idea, how to use it, how to work. The second one is to make sure that we keep on getting the best possible quality. So the danger, in a slightly ironic way with where we are at the moment, is that when it first started, there were a lot of people very sceptical about this whole idea of having non-execs, not least quite a lot of the non-execs themselves. They thought, well, are we going to be used as decoration, diversion, air cover, whatever. And individual experiences will always vary, but the vast majority have been very pleasantly surprised about the experience, how they've been able to contribute, and actually they would like to do more. And in an odd way, we're now in a position where we're attracting people to come in and do this, because they now think it's a good thing, whereas 4 or 5 years ago we weren't quite sure. So it was important that we got some big names in through the door 4 or 5 years ago. I think what we now need to do is keep the quality level, but look for greater range of diverse talent, greater range of diversity in terms of background, and start to match a bit more in a tuned way, which we're doing with Andy and the team, the needs of the department in terms of what skill sets they need with the profile of the people we can bring to bear. But I have to say, a month in post the election, just anecdotally going, and I'm basically a sort of very, very cheap, i.e. free headhunter for the government at the moment. I'm being quite pleasantly surprised at the reaction I'm getting from people I'm approaching who I think, well, I might as well ask them because you never know. And some quite big names have lined up to be put in the pool for the next set of posts we have coming forward. So I think we are going to keep it, but we have to make a real commitment to quality. And if the ministers can see that the choices they're being presented with are really great, it's easier for them to engage with them, and then they know they're going to get value for them. The final bit for me is these cross-cutting government themes. And I just want to sort of briefly touch on these, and we may do this more in the Q&A period going forward. Where we are, I think, at the moment is there is this sort of massive change agenda in government, and I'm sure people like Peter have been studying government far more than I've ever done. This is sort of, yep, they've been massive change programs for the last 30 years, and this is, in some ways, nothing new. I think there are two things that are slightly different about this next phase, one of which is the sheer fiscal squeeze that is coming down the track. Now, whether it comes out in exactly the way the manifesto commitment has been written, or whether it's a different timing or different amounts, but objectively it is, you know, the famous 20 billion of cuts have got to be found from somewhere. That is simply not going to happen by a process of sort of 5% difference here or 5% difference here. There have to be some real prioritization choices, and there have to be some transformation programs that will generally change the cost efficiency of government primarily through digital, although not exclusively through digital. None of that is very easy, to put it mildly, and when you're doing it on this scale, I think it becomes very, very complicated. But I think that is what's making this particular phase markedly different. And the second thing which I think is different, and it is, you know, post the outcome of the election, one can say this, is there is a decision-making process now, I think, within government, albeit with a small 12-seat majority, but is going to move at some speed, and partly informed by the fact that you need to do these things earlier rather than later because of the natural decay of the parliamentary majority and the natural entropy in the system. So the combination of the financial need and the timing is telescoping quite a lot of pressure into this next 18 months, and a lot of the big decisions and big changes are going to be made in the short term. So I think this does feel different, and I think this does feel like an opportunity for the non-exec community, the 70 plus of us hopefully in the future, to genuinely help comment not on, you know, is that manifesto commitment right or wrong, because that is just not our job. But if you want to do that, Minister, then the chances of doing that are X, Y, and Z, and which one of these 20 things do you want to take away in order to give you a chance of meeting those priorities? So the things that we're looking at, and as a result of the scale of the change, there's quite a lot of debate on, well, what could we do? A lot of debate with John and with Jeremy. And I think we've arrived on the sort of 5 themes we want to focus the non-execs on. And as I said before, in addition to what they have to deliver department by department. So the themes are basically talent strategy for the civil service is actually the top. The business plans for department are probably the short-term most important thing that we've got to focus on, because a lot of the very big decisions are going to be taken through this process by the end of the year for the spending review. Third element is arm's length bodies, and there was, I know, comments by Bernard Jenkins in the past about the lack of, if you like, oversight in arm's length bodies, perhaps from government departments, and particularly speaking as a non-politician, in some cases where I think they were set up as a way of taking a rather nasty political problem away and keeping it at arm's length, rather than it being sort of embedded in the department. Now, unfortunately, in a world where you're trying to do a lot more for a lot less, I think you have to start taking some of these things back in and dealing with them. The fourth area, which is an area where John Browne in particular made a great start, is on major projects, which I'll come back to. And finally, it's risk management, which is, again, a topic we've touched. So if I just briefly run through those. And I should have said at the end of the stock take, I mean, one of the things one of the reasons I wanted to take this role on is because of the foundations that both Francis Maud and John Browne have put in place. So I genuinely have seen a workable system now which we can then take on to the next phase. But it has been embedded, and I think it wouldn't have happened without those two, and I should pay particular tribute to them for that act of creation, which is often the hardest thing to do. On talent management, we obviously have a role to play as non-execs in the department, and we are very interested in the senior appointments throughout each department. But what we're now looking at is putting together a small group of non-execs to work on some of the broader governmental themes around talent, particularly in terms of designing a talent strategy, what type of people do we need where and when, getting into really easy issues like pay, should be no problem at all there, and trying to understand how we can make sure that as we go through the changes, we end up with absolutely the best possible civil service and respecting its strengths, its differences, and the values of the civil service. And I think having a voice, an independent voice, that believes in the civil service, is not blindly sort of rah-rah, but generally believes in it and can see how we might match the challenges to the people resources is, I think, potentially a very useful role that the non-execs can play. And I think while there are obvious questions like how do we grow functional leadership in the organisation, how do we deal with commercial capability, how do we deal with digital capability, quite a lot of what I would like to see the non-execs play into is the further development of leadership in the civil service. And an observation that struck me 4 years ago was that there was a sense that leadership was what HR did, and you focus on the sort of policy content and the technical difficult stuff. And actually my observation from the rest of the organisations in the rest of the world is that leadership is everyone's job, and it's all about your team, how they can be led, what they can do, and you absolutely have to devote time and effort to it. And I think there's a lot more we can do across the civil service on that. Second priority is on business plans. There we are working at two levels. One, obviously, the individual business plans are being developed and will be reviewed by the boards. There is an attempt to try and get to 4 or 5 clear priorities, which I really hope does work, and I hope it's not a way of smuggling 27 priorities into 5 portmanteau terms, and that'll be one of the challenges I think we'll have to work our way through. But in the business plan, I can see a set of conflicting requirements coming into play, including manifesto commitments, including spending envelopes, including business as usual existing transformation. But what we have to do, I think, is distill it down into what are the things that really, really, really do matter, and have we got the right resources and the right level of resources to deliver that. And the job of prioritisation, I think, is going to be more acute in this next 12 to 18 months than we've seen probably in the previous sort of 3 years. So the business plans are top of my current priority short term and are just getting going now within the departments. It's going to be an iterative process, and there's going to be a need to work out how they also fit together. So the traditional role of flipping 27 up in a line and then not working out how it comes together, I think we have to look at it as a whole as well, particularly when you talk about things like digital transformation. Can we actually afford to do 27 digital transformation projects if we've only got a limited amount of resource? I would say probably not, but who is going to sit there and sort of make those trade-offs? The arm's length bodies, I think, is an area where we are beginning to get involved more. I think, again, there is an opportunity there to do a set of clustered reviews of those arm's length bodies and get the non-execs more closely aligned. One of the obvious things we need to do is get the non-execs from the arm's length bodies more in touch with the non-execs in the departments, and it was always kept at quite a remote level. And the degree to which these arm's length bodies actually ought to remain arm's length bodies, I think, will have to come up as a query, particularly when we go back into the logic of the spending review. So I think there are real issues, particularly when individual departments are dependent on an arm's length body to do their delivery. So there are differing challenges around government. My view is that you need to take a view of your department as a non-exec, which includes a proper understanding of the arm's length bodies, and that is easier in some places than it is in others. Whether or not we can actually do that at speed, I don't know, but I think this business plan process, going back to that, will force that connection a bit more, and we do need to work with the arm's length bodies, and particularly the non-execs. On the major projects, just briefly, we will continue to support the MPLA, the MPA. I think there's a really good progress been made on that when I compare the level of project capability from when I arrived at DWP and then the sort of systems and controls I'm seeing at the end. I'd say the thing is moving forward. Is it perfect? No. Is it going to focus on the right things? I think it will. And Tony Meggs, who's stepping into the MPA role now, I think has got a very clear view. I sat with him yesterday about what we could do and how we could sort of help with both the governance and improving capability there. The final one is risk management, which is probably the nerdiest subject on that agenda, but actually I think one of the more critical ones, and particularly where direct importation of risk skills can be done through the non-execs. Just with the Cabinet Office Board yesterday, Amy Sterling, who looks after the Cabinet Board, who comes in from a very strong commercial background, getting that sort of calibre, and I would treat it as I would in my other commercial life as a non-exec. The calibre of non-exec, asking the right questions, getting to the right priorities, is incredibly valuable. And when you see it actually in action, this point about, well, what's the value of the board, how does it add value, you sort of say, well, come and see one of the two of these meetings and you'll just see the impact these people can have. And risk management is, again, a bit of a cottage industry across Whitehall. There are standards developing, but it needs to be better. And given the scale of some of the change and some of the programs going on, you know, I think we could do a lot more in that area, hence the focus. So I will shut up there, but basically to say, sort of recap three things. The system of using non-exec boards as part of, and I would just stress, the board is the three, it's not just the non-execs, I think is now established enough and is playing a positive role across government. It is not playing it in every place in the same way, nor to the same level, and that's sort of normal. Frankly, you know, if you've run a company, you've got multiple departments or multiple operating companies, they never operate to the same level. I'm not that surprised. But what I think we have seen is established enough, and now we need to go on to the next stage. And the next stage happens to coincide with this extremely challenging 18-month period of very intense change. And I think this is the point when the non-execs need to and must step into that advisory, challenging role to help focus on the delivery of those objectives and really force some of those prioritization conversations, which otherwise are very easy to deflect and defer. And finally, I very much look forward to us as a whole and myself in particular playing a role, because what I would say, and on behalf of the non-execs, we've got at least one in the room here, I think we've all found that incredibly satisfying to be involved in something where you feel you're contributing and you feel you can make, in a small way, a difference. And so one of the messages I want to give out to the general, if you like, Whitehall and beyond stakeholder groups is use the non-execs, because they have a huge amount to offer. They want to be involved. They don't necessarily know where they can play a role unless they're asked to. And the more specific you make the request, the more likely it is you'll get a positive response. But they are, I think, a force for good and a force for, you know, a real level of progress in what will be a pretty challenging 18 months. So thank you very much, and I think we'll go to Q&A.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian. That was absolutely fascinating in explaining what the role is and outlining what the priorities are going to be over the particularly the next 18 months and taking it forward. In fact, just before opening it up, just get into some questions, particularly the last one you raised, because there appears to be a kind of expansion of scope. Yes. If you go back to what Francis Ward and John Browne were saying in 2010-11, yeah. The involvement in permanent secretary evaluation makes good sense. Involvement appointments, the range of doing deep dives on particular issues of departments. Yeah. It does seem to be expanding. I mean, is there a sense in which some of the non-executives are almost being used as substitutes for bringing in a consultant?
Again, cheap consultancy. Look, I think there's always a slight danger of that, and there is a sort of danger of becoming the default answer, oh, well, we'll just ask the non-exec, and that sort of ticks that box. I think though what it's more based on so far is people finding useful expertise sat around the table that they can go to and ask. And actually, in the commercial world, I think the way you use non-execs is you use them outside the boardroom and you get them involved in areas where they can add specific value. And in that sense, I think what we've seen is the natural evolution of that role into areas of added value, which is a process of just the thing maturing. Because if you don't have a template for how that works, then you're not quite sure. And one of the things we're trying to do with the network is explain to various departments, look, this is what somebody has used the non-execs for. You might find it useful, you might not, it's up to you. But I think sharing that experience and saying you don't just have these people to read a board pack and to show up once a quarter. They are a more general advisory resource. They, however, are non-exec, so the number of things you actively throw at them is still going to be limited, and I think that will provide the sort of cap. And at the moment, I think most of them are happy to get involved and give a bit more. I think if it gets a bit into overkill, we'll have to watch. But at the moment, I think it's a positive evolution into a broader relationship with those non-execs.
Are there things non-execs shouldn't do?
Well, look, I mean, non-execs shouldn't take decisions, and the accountability has to remain very, very clear. I also think non-execs have to be extremely careful about political alignment. I think the way I describe it is being a political donor shouldn't stop you being a non-exec. I think where I would personally draw the lines, I think if you're, say, a working peer, you shouldn't probably be a non-exec. And so I think there are sort of boundaries there which fit the, I've got to have to find a better word than independent, because you're not really independent because you're trying to serve delivery of objectives that you have to go with. But it's enough independence, I think, and if you were doing things that compromise your independence, then I think you start to say, well, maybe you shouldn't be in the non-exec role.
Now, you mentioned there are variations across the departments. I mean, not just because different functions department, you gave the example of DCMS and DWP, but there also appear to be quite significant variations unrelated to that. I mean, if you look in the report, I mean, on numbers of board meetings, I mean, you gave the extreme example, but there's another example which is zero of meetings, which is the Treasury, where the board didn't seem to meet at all. Now, how can you, I mean, which...
Yeah, that's on my to-do list.
Right.
I'm actually going to a Treasury Board meeting, is it next week, I think? Yeah. So I'm going to have stern words with them on that front. Yeah.
Right. Well, at least they're meeting. Yeah. But underlying that is also a point, the degree to which you can, you say there's a network and you try and spread ideas around that of doing it, clearly also pulling together people to do common tasks. You mentioned talent management and so on. But also I wondered the degree to which you can look across and say, hold on, the way these NEDs are appointed in this area, or the practices in that. Do you see yourself as partly policing that?
Yeah, I mean, just on appointments, I mean, well, maybe two parts to that, Peter. Firstly, there are some, hence the common themes we're trying to sort of work on, which says, look, where we're definitely going to try and drive both best practice share but also standard approaches in this area and working together are on those 5 themes. So while we've got a group of non-execs working together on talent, we will probably end up with a similar groups working on all the other sort of four priorities. But there'll also be ad hoc interventions where we want to get people together and say, for example, we've just finished reviewing all the perm secs. We're going to do a little review with a couple of people, say, okay, how did that go? What can we do better next year? How does that feed into that process so that we capture the learning quickly? I think one of my jobs, going back to what I said about trying to maintain the quality of candidate, is to be very clear that these non-exec appointments are Secretary of State appointments. The lead non-exec in each department is appointed by the PM, and that's equally fairly clear. What hasn't been as clear, and I've just written to the PM to say, look, there's some process questions I'd like to get into, is my role precisely in that, and I'm sort of involved, but it's not written down anywhere yet. So I think there is a role to clarify the process a bit, and my take is I should be involved with the lead non-execs. the lead non-exec and the perm sec should appoint the rest of the board, because that's, I think, the way it works. And frankly, if you don't have the Secretary of State involved in appointing those people, then they tend not to be that engaged. And I think that's one of the challenges from the first 4 years. So there's a balancing act here to be had, but I do think that, what I'm trying to do now is I'm pre-qualifying a pool of candidates. I'm then providing a list of candidates to the Secretary of State. I'm not the only person suggesting candidates, and that's fine. And we also need to join it up with the rest of the public sector appointments process. So there's a few bits and pieces of the process to do, but I see myself as contributing to help make sure particularly the lead non-exec appointments are done in a way which is consistent.
But of other non-execs, it would be up to a Secretary of State to appoint, even if they hadn't been through your pre-process, pool process.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear. I mean, the process at the moment is very clear that, these are appointments of the Secretary of State. They are advisory board members, boom, boom, boom. What we're trying to do is create working relationships which are on the whole actually very good with Secretaries of State or relevant ministers, and say, here's a list. The most important thing to my mind is agreeing what type of person are we looking for. So we've done a lot of work on mapping the skill sets and saying, okay, so what do we need? And we need more of this here, more of that there. And then just being involved in the conversation enough to say, okay, well, if you want a great person who's done lots of digital, or somebody who's done a lot of third sector, who's somebody who understands international, then here are some options. And I think my job, again, in this process is, the engagement and the challenge to say, right, I think you need X. Ultimately, in these situations, it's sort of their call, but as long as I've got a clear involvement, I think I'm playing my role in it. But I don't get to veto all the appointments.
The other thing which you mentioned, you were talking about how the system had built up and was more acceptable, and over the last 5 years. You said particularly to permanent secretaries.
Yeah.
Because our sense also is that the permanent secretaries initially, 5 years ago, were very hostile to
very sceptical.
Sceptical in the Whitehall sense of the
yes,
term.
Yes. Really against it.
Really, to the system Francis Maude was proposing and bringing in. But then, within a year, I've been told by permanent secretaries, absolutely wonderful, these non-executives, because in a sense they saw partly a free or very cheap source of advice. But where the inconsistency is principally in relation to secretaries of state, partly because their own background of not necessarily having ever been in big organisations.
I know, it's a fair point, and inevitably, if you're asked to help work on the delivery of results and the way a department works, your sort of time focus is more inside the department towards the exec team and obviously the perm sec, and I think that's fine. Equally, there's quite a big variation, both I saw in the last government and here, with the way people as ministers think about their departments. And one previous Secretary of State said, no, I don't really see the perm sec because he's running the department and I do the policy, and it's like this. And one of the things we're trying to do with the boards is to pull in the Secretary of State and ministers, and there's a question about how to involve junior ministers in particular, to understand the dynamics of delivery and making things happen. But in the first instance, I think most of the people coming from the outside immediately saw stuff they could help inside the department, so naturally worked down there. And I think one of the big concerns for the perm secs at the start was this would be an alternative command line or something like that. But because we, I think, got the first wave of selections were frankly very, very good, you had people who were often typically were non-exec directors in other places and knew how to contribute in that way and weren't there to try and replace the perm sec. If anything, they looked at it and went, God, I don't fancy doing that, you poor bugger. So actually, I think they became quite quickly a sort of good neutral ally. And then for the Secretary of State who were interested in their departments, and I work with, certainly Ian Smith is extremely interested in it, he found it really useful to have someone else to discuss it with, where there was a sort of free, open zone where you could sort of just chat about stuff and it didn't have to impact maybe the relationship.
What about accountability? All right, lead one appointed by the Prime Minister, the other ones in departments appointed by Secretary of State, fine. But you're important figures. Doing permanent secretary appraisal, being involved in appointments, being involved advising on delivery of very substantial programmes. How does the accountability come in?
Yes, I had a novel experience of that. Well, two novel experiences in the last 4 years. First of all, I was attacked in the House of Parliament by a Labour MP, and then for being too Tory, I think. And then I was attacked by a Tory peer for being too obstructive of government, which I thought I must be doing it roughly right at that point. But it does raise this point saying, who voted for this quote-unquote constitutional change? You've got SPADs, you've got non-execs in the place. Is this changing it? And I can recognise the concern because I sort of see the analysis. I don't actually think it works because ultimately, and this may be a cop-out, we are all really clear we are there as advisors to the people who are truly accountable. And there are two types of accountability that I completely respect. One is the democratic mandate, which is very clear. And the other one is the controls around parliamentary, the accounting officer regime, which means that there is super clear accountability. And it's one of the reasons why it isn't like the PLC world and some of the stuff that I would normally worry about in an audit committee actually happens differently because you've got a different structure around it. So I think as long as we are clearly in advisory space, and maybe going to your previous point, Peter, not being drawn into some sort of decision function, and that is a fine line because technically last week I chaired the committee that decided the perm-sex pay. So you could argue, well, I'm sort of saying, actually, I think I'm there as an independent control on a process that then ultimately, and I can say this because I know we've got to go and hand this bit of paper into number 10, the Prime Minister is actually going to individually decide this. What we are providing is a systemic, hopefully balanced view that allows him to make a decision. And I think it may be a bit of a fine line, but as long as I can see I'm on the advisory side of the line rather than decision taking, then you don't stray into the accountability problem.
Right, let's open it up to questioning from people. Could you say who you are? Lady there.
Vivian Dews, formerly of the Office of Fair Trading. In the light of what you said, Sir Ian, about independent challenge and speaking truth to power, I wonder if you could comment on what happened at the Ministry of Justice, where the 4 non-execs, and I know one's here, but the 4 non-execs were asked to step down fairly early into the new government. And I think it just raised the question in my mind, perhaps many people's minds, about whether the system can finally be effective if some ministers don't appear to value that independence.
Okay, look, obviously, sort of 3 quick comments. Firstly, the MOJ changes are the only ones like that. I mean, if this was breaking out in every department, I might view it slightly differently. So I think although it was quite an abrupt change and it's on the public record what's happened, I don't think it's, at this point, I would say it's not symptomatic of a broader trend. Secondly, there is a certain irony in the particular change, because as the Lord Chancellor said, it's precisely because he was so impressed by the value of his board at DFE and wanted to launch himself into his new role with a new board that he had picked for this challenge, that he wanted to make the change, as opposed to being, who the hell are these people, I'm just going to wander off without them. So whether or not that's a valid reason or not, I do think Michael actually genuinely used his board more intensively at DFE than frankly some other less engaged Secretary of States. And so he came in on I really want a good board. Now the third thing I'd say is that the rules are fairly clear. It is down to him. He can do it. I'm involved on the lead non-exec. We're having conversations with it, and we're getting on with that appointment. I think he actually, when you make a change like that, the optics of it do look immediately like, well, hold on a minute, you just want a bunch of, your own men or women there. From the observation of how the various boards have worked, particularly DFE with him, actually he got quite a lot of challenge from his non-execs. He used them more extensively in the departments than some others, which I think maybe caused people to think, well, are they really independent? But if you talk to Theodore Agnew, he's a pretty independent type. So I don't, at this stage, have a major problem. The only area of concern I would have is the is probably around audit, where I think you do need to be careful about losing the corporate memory and continuity. Now, again, it's less of an issue in this sort of structure than it would be in a PLC, because if you fired the entire non-execs in a PLC, you'd have a major meltdown on your hands. Because of the way the controls and the accounting controls and the other elements we were, and it's got to remember, 1/3 of the board, I don't think it's as big an issue, but I think it's one of the areas on process we might look at to say, do you want to, for example, have a precedent that says if you want to change the board, great. There will be always opportunities to refresh, that's fine. But do look out for particularly audit continuity, I think, is the concern. Actually, although it was an abrupt process, it has nothing to do with the non-execs who were there. It was Michael's desire to do something. It's been an incredibly effective board, actually, MOJ. But he clearly wanted to go into this next 5 years with his team. And if we'd seen a different government lineup, frankly, from the one we got, we probably would have seen quite a lot of change around the circuit. So I think in the round, it's raised for me a couple of questions on process, which we're going to follow up. But I think providing, as we continue to be, we're very involved in the process of making sure the appointments that come through are the right calibre, and the early signs are they will be. I think it's part of change. I'm afraid when ministers change, there will be a certain amount of churn.
Right, there's ladies and gentlemen behind Lauren. Oh. And then the gentleman behind you.
All right. Thank you. My name is Sukhvinder Kaur-Stubbs, and I suppose I'm one of these nerdy people that do like risk.
Good.
Having served a few years on the Better Regulation Executive. But my question is sort of related, but it's actually more about capture. And how long an independent
Very good.
An independent can remain
Super question. Yeah, really good question. And look, it's obviously in corporate life you start worrying when you, frankly, you worry beyond 6 years. You start to think people are they really independent? I know the test is a bit longer, but my sense is there's a fine line between being useful in helping a department deliver stuff and being captured by it. And I think broadly I would subscribe to a 6-year maximum. So 2-3 year terms before you go completely native. And I think you probably do need to keep refreshing that sort of independent challenge a bit. But it is interesting this model from the private sector reading across to the public, because actually the type of engagement is not quite as arm's lengthy as it needs to be. What you do need to do is have, I think, the complete honesty. And in some cases, if you've got a better relationship because you work with them, but it's actually easier to be honest with somebody you know as opposed to someone that you haven't quite worked out how they work. So I think it's a real, it's a live challenge, particularly because if you think we're now, we're 4 years in, we are going to have to go through a refresh of the boards naturally, and I think we do need to bear that in mind. If you see people there for too long, I think we need to start moving them. But one of the things I'm also interested in is trying to move people from one departmental experience to another, because if it was like for them as it was for me, it just took me 18 months to understand what the hell was going on, because it's very different.
Right, gentleman behind.
Thank you. My name is David Lewis. I'm a property person by background. I've worked both in the public and private sector running large property departments. Because of that, I'm very aware of the way that PLCs work. And my sort of question is that, is there a case for having, in effect, a sort of group board? So it would be like UK group.
Yes.
Because I'm very used to a situation where you'd have a group board, but also you'd have subsidiary boards. And I just wondered, would that be a way of, and you have, I think, at various times this afternoon referred to this sort of cross-cutting, and clearly that's a very important issue, is because at the moment everything is still silo, and whether there's any merit in sort of looking at trying to get a much more cross-cutting through the use of non-execs. Yeah,
look, that's a cracking observation. And I think with the changes we were just talking about John Manzoni's appointment, and could the Cabinet Office maybe start to play into that type of group board role? I'm not sure we know yet what the best way is of doing it, but I think that's the direction of travel. And what we are very interested in doing is supporting the functional leadership agenda that John's got, which leads you more naturally into a group and operating unit sort of piece. That said, I am also much more aware now of the differences department by department. I think I remember I've said this to Peter. I mean, frankly, I wouldn't design a government with 27 departments. I think it's a very strange idea. But anyway, it's there. Trying to make it work better within those limits means that you have to probably work out as effectively some form of matrix. At the moment, my observation would be the matrix is a bit too decentralised and hasn't got enough functional leadership, so that's probably where it moves to. But the degree of difference between the departments and the challenges they face is so enormous. If you try and put a one-size-fits-all in, you will fall over. So there's a sort of bit of intelligent organisational management to get there, and I think it will start evolving. And one of the things I'm sitting on the Cabinet Office Board quite interested to see is whether we could start to use that as one of the ways you have that picture, because you've got Jeremy and John on it and Matt Hancock, so potentially it's a way into it. But it's a very, very interesting question.
Yeah. Gentlemen, sorry. The two along there. Sorry. Yeah.
Simon Judge, Department for Education. It's a bit of a follow-on to that question, really. Do you think you have a role in helping the central departments who are delivering services to all departments actually be more accountable to their customers?
Yes. Brilliant. Excellent. I was discussing this yesterday at the board, because if you do things like central services, one of the things you ought to have is a standard, some feedback and actually engagement with your quote-unquote customers about how that's working and what isn't working. And there is, to my mind, again, from the other side of the fence when I was at DWP, I generally couldn't understand what the Cabinet Office was, what it was doing, because it would show up and slap us around the head on one day and then do a services the next day, and then what was the Treasury doing versus that, and this whole, it's probably clear to people who've spent 30 years in Whitehall, but for those coming out, it was really not clear. So one of the things that we've suggested in the board meeting yesterday is that we had an explicit definition of the role and intervention of the Cabinet Office in where it was in control mode, where it was in service mode, and what were the standards and requirements for it to provide services. And I think the challenge for the Cabinet Office is it's in danger of having to become, for the first time in its existence, a delivery department, because it's actually trying to do things like shared services and my CSP and things like that. And that is very not where it's come from. And the danger is it won't know how to do that very well. So I think there is absolutely a job of defining the relationships and defining the Cabinet Office to Treasury relationship as well. And I think that would help the clarity in that. Certainly all the non-execs around the network would welcome that enormously.
Right. Just there. And then.
Thank you. My name's Emily Andrews. I'm a researcher here at the IFG. And I've got a question about management information and transparency.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you've said it's important for departmental boards to identify appropriate management information to track progress against priorities. Is that currently published ever? And if not, will it be? Can it be?
You mean externally published?
Yes.
I think one of the observations I'd make is that there is a degree of sensitivity about publishing stuff externally, which is higher than I would have expected coming in from the outside, which means the default assumption is, let's not publish it. I think the more fundamental issue is being much clearer about what good looks like and what you're trying to do. And then I think the case for publishing that becomes much stronger, because the danger at the moment is just there's so much data. There's just KPIs and stuff. I mean, the first ball pack I think I saw was about that thick, and it didn't make any sense, and it really didn't. And it was in parliamentary accounting finance terms, which is even more baffling. And increasingly getting it to, well, if we do this, this moves the dial, and therefore that is something we should publish. I think I'd hope would come out of the business plans this time in a more useful way, and potentially I would say it's a good discipline to publish those. I think there's quite a long way to go before we get there, but I think the direction of travel, to be fair to most of the departments I've seen, is towards greater transparency. They do want to do it. They're just very nervous about having their own data sort of fed back to them and reinterpreted in a different way. So I think there's more to do there, but I think that's where we're going towards.
Miranda Curtis. I'm a trustee of the Institute for Government and have a fairly varied portfolio in the corporate and third sector. I'm interested in this question of where accountability lies within the system for the articulation and development of strategy in relation to big projects.
Yeah.
In the sense that you've talked about, for example, not wanting to replicate 27 different departments pursuing different digital transformation strategies. What is the forum in which, say, a government-wide approach to digital transformation and other major projects of national interest might take place, and what's the role of the lead non-execs in that project?
Tremendous. Well, great question, Miranda. I think the honest answer is there isn't a good forum at the moment, because it sort of relies somehow on some superhuman contribution from Jeremy Hayward to somehow make everything work. And my sense is that there is a role for a much more explicit, frankly, sort of probably at the core of it, a triumvirate of Jeremy, John Manzoni and Nick McPherson actually working as a team, which is culturally quite a challenge from where the various organisations start. But that within that, I think there is a real role of the lead non-execs coming together. And I think it's one of the things that we have frankly learnt, I mean, because I don't think we knew this 4 years ago, that actually we've got a point of view of this process and some ability to contribute to that. And that in a perfect world, I'm not sure we go to the group board, but it's something like that in the middle, which says, okay, how do we make those trade-offs and where are we going to do it? And I think for the first time, this business plan process might force that in a way. And what I really hope it does is we do not have a simple spending envelope type discussion, which just says, well, the answer is Z, forget it. There is some tying together of that, and there is a trade-off. So I'm very, even if it's not a formal forum, I'm hoping that the lead non-execs can come in and play into that. It probably requires those three to actually also decide on some of these things. And then there is ultimately another layer, which is the political oversight of it, which says, okay, you may want that, but actually here's the political requirement. And that's where this role as non-exec is slightly different from your standard sort of portfolio experience, is that you can feed in what you think is an obvious practicality or a suggestion, and frankly you can get overruled for perfectly, decent quote-unquote political reasons, because that's the way it works. But I think it's really interesting you picked up on that, because it's absolutely a live topic, and it is something I think for the first time the non-execs can start to play a role in, partly because we've actually got ourselves slightly under the table now. We can start contributing, and I really hope we do that. That's great.
Two final ones here. Lady next to Miranda, then Sue Street in front.
Hello, I'm Una Harper. I'm a non-exec director in the Government Legal Department.
Right.
And so we've now merged most of the lawyers around government and are serving most of your 25 to 27 departments.
Yeah.
But we're not on your radar because we're a non-ministerial department. And yet, to do our job and make sure we're really meeting the needs of all of those departments, I think we really need to have more visibility of exactly the issues you raised, and Miranda's question too. I would say those 5 areas are critical to us as well, and I would very much like us to have a part in each of those areas as well. So how do we do that if we're not a ministerial department?
Very good. I think then probably the very short answer is, why don't we have a chat afterwards? What's interesting is that the function is held up as one of the examples of successfully creating a service provider in Whitehall that is respected and actually works. So I'd be very nervous if we in any way screwed that up. So I'd be very keen to work out what's the right way to support. And I think, to be honest, Una, there are areas in this where the non-execs are sort of learning their way into it and working out what to do and not to do. And why I've mentioned arm's length bodies is that we sort of bumped into that in the first phase, didn't quite know what to do with it, and there were other areas like yourself and in fact a couple of other areas where we go, not quite sure how we're supposed to engage with that, because precisely as you're saying, it's not a ministerial body, it doesn't meet the model, but we should be. So I think we're into this, so I think this is the next phase. I think that's exactly the sort of question we ought to be sort of engaging with. So I'm very happy to catch up another time with it. Sue.
Sue Street. I was sorry at the way our tenure at the Ministry of Justice ended, but mainly, as you say, on the grounds of the risks of discontinuity at audit, and I know you're onto that, but I didn't really want the sense to be that I was disappointed in the whole governance reforms.
Okay.
I think they've been absolutely excellent. I've served 5 years with 2 Justice Secretaries who, although the same political party, were very, very different in their approaches. And I really feel that they made every effort, as did officials, to welcome our advice. And, you know, I've found it a very challenging and satisfying process. So, you know, I just wanted to put on record, I will remain an advocate of the governance reforms, and I hope they succeed and
watch out,
follow
because
through.
you might find yourself doing the same job in another place. So,
Ian, thank you very much indeed. It's been absolutely fascinating, both your speech and your openness in answering so a very interesting range of questions, really fascinating questions, which shows, and again, comes back to the point where I said in introducing you, all this is not sufficiently widely known, and you know, one of the things you made of your remarks is that I'm delighted we've got the audience here. We're putting it out in cyberspace in various ways, and we'll be highlighting the speech, and we'll be having it on a website. But that it's great, it needs to be much widely known, particularly to the politicians. I mean, on select committees and to new ministers and so on, about what actually you do. And we regard this as part of a continuing process. So we, at some stage in the future, we look forward to welcome you back to hear progress reports, and also, as you know, the Institute working with you and your colleagues on that. So I'd like to thank you very much indeed, and ask the audience to join me for what's been an absolutely fascinating 75 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.